Hi, this is Pete here from See Your Toes Again, and this is podcast number 34. Now, this is a direct follow-on from podcast number 33 with Harmony, talking about her schizophrenia and her weight loss, which was quite incredible. So this is the second part. If you haven't listened to podcast 33, which is part 1, then I strongly urge you to do so, because everything in this podcast will then make sense. So sit back and enjoy. Thank you very much. So did you, just for me to get the story right in my head, did you start sort of a low-carb diet? Was that a method of losing body fat? Was that your aim with it originally?
Yeah, so low carb, low sugar was just, I thought, I've never done that. Let me give that a try,
Okay.
and I saw improvements in my weight loss. But while I was witnessing 5 pounds a month dropping off of me every month, I also was like, I'm seeing mental health improvements,
Yeah.
like I'm seeing the need of a reduction and another reduction of medicine. And I didn't know why it was happening to me. I wasn't going to look it in the eye and say,
Yeah, well, that's
no,
right.
thank
Yeah,
you.
sort of, touch wood sort of scenario. That's right. Oh, that's great, because of course I expected you to say, "Oh, I read such and such." I just had Christine Trimp on the previous podcast, and she said, she got onto Google and learned all about this, that, and the next thing. She was obese, in her words, and she made the decision to give this ketogenic caper a go, and she loved it. It went well with her, and I was expecting you to say something similar. So effectively, though, you almost stumbled upon it by going low carb, and then it was only later you figured out you needed to go high fat as part of your low carb.
Yeah, I figured out that was the mistake that probably led to my relapse, is that
Yeah.
I lost all the fuel supply by having the girth or the adipose fat on me. I eliminated that fuel supply, but I needed to replace it to continue the mental health aspects.
Yeah. And so many people, of course, who do, I know we're deviating a little bit, but it's all related. So many people who do the ketogenic diet, whether it's for weight loss or for health, I do it for health or for mental health. It's difficult for people. It's easy for people to say, okay, I'll cut out sugars if I have to. But it's a whole lot more difficult for them to say, and I'm going to increase how much fat I eat. Especially with our generations who have spent all our lives being told that fats are bad. Saturated fat is terrible. Butter is bad. You should use margarine.
And then you add an obese individual into it. You're going to eat what? You're going to eat fat? Well, aren't you fat enough?
Yeah, you got enough of that already.
Yeah. So like you think you had it bad? Were you ever 273 pounds? It's a lot worse when you're obese and you're telling yourself you're going to eat more of this,
Yep, you're going to eat more fat, which everyone has said all of our lives that eating fat will make you fat, which turns out to be baloney. Of course, eating sugar makes you fat. Eating fat doesn't make you fat.
Yes.
It's all baloney. But yeah, you've got it in your head. I'm 273 pounds and I'm going to eat fat. What's wrong with me?
Yeah. Or it's misinformation. It's misinformation.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. So you cut back on your carbs and stuff. Did you do the carb cutting gradually, or did you just decide to stop eating sugary stuff?
It started with just going more whole foods. Like at first, I still included the sugars of the fresh fruits and stuff like that, but I eliminated processed foods and just stuck to whole clean ingredients, and stuff like that. And but it evolved out of necessity to especially when the meds completely stopped working last year, I realized the importance of eliminating pretty much virtually all sugars and the need to eliminate only keep 20 net carbs, and the just going over that could trigger symptoms for me, or just not balancing my plate with the proper ratio of fat to proteins to carbs could trigger symptoms in me. And so, just it started gradually, and I think it's been a change that I've made over 3.5 years time. It kind of developed into what works for me the best.
Yeah.
And that can change.
Yeah.
And that can change given on your personal circumstances. Like when I had the extra fat on me, I had a huge supply of ketones. I didn't need it necessarily through dietary fat. But as I lost the weight, I needed to implement a strict ketogenic diet with way more fat than I was used to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where people do get, do go off the wagon, because they are trying to cut even more. You're down to 10, 20 pounds away from your desired, maybe 40 pounds away from your desired weight. You're thinking, that's where I want to get. I'm going to go hard now. I'll reduce my calories, and I'll cut out all of my fats as well as my carbs. And of course, all you do there is you starve your body. Your body says, well, I'm in starvation mode. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to save every ounce of energy I can get. And of course, you stall. And that's why when you're trying to cut down and lose that extra bit of weight, you've got to still eat lots of fats, like you're saying. It's so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think, go ahead.
Your body would also have liked all the protein that you were giving it, I would have thought.
Yeah. Protein is good. I do think that it can be very helpful to take in protein.
What sort
especially when you exercise.
Yeah. So at one stage, that's a good question, actually. And you were going to say something a minute ago. What was that? Do you remember what it was?
No.
Okay, that's right then. At what stage did you decide, apart from actually wanting to stay standing when you were at your worst, at what stage did you decide that exercise was a good idea? Because a lot of people don't think exercise, like you said you found every excuse to not exercise. So at what stage did you decide that exercise was a good idea?
Right about the time I had the surgery, and honestly, I couldn't do much, but you can always do something. You can always do something. Like I couldn't do anything. Like my feet would be so swollen, probably because of inactivity and not use. And so I had to wear those UFU shoes in the house because they provided cushion to support the painful swelling that I was taking on in my feet. And probably just because when you're obese, you take on more inflammation in your body and stuff like that. So I had a lot of discomfort in my body, and it hurt like heck to exercise. It hurt like heck just to stand because of the sheer amount of inflammation. But if you focus on your solutions, like finding a comfortable shoe in the house to wear when you're walking or standing, just to encourage you to do more of that helps you get more active, then you find solutions to your problems instead of situations where you're like, well, I can't do that, and it gradually will build upon each other. Like every little step you do in the right direction to move more and incorporate more movement, more exercise. Like people say, oh, I have to work. I can't exercise like you. Oh yeah? Try taking the stairs at work. try getting to work a little early so you could take the stairs multiple times, like you can, you're just
Yeah.
not focused on your solutions for yourself. You
Yeah.
can, but when you focus on the solutions for yourself and instead of focusing on the problems that inhibit that, because if you focus on your problems, you're just going to get more problems. But if you focus on the solutions, you're going to make progress.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing, because I can understand that somebody who is in the position you used to be in can be thinking, what's the point? I'm obese. I'm on so many meds. I feel like crap. I feel like going to sleep all the time. What's the point? And the point is, do you want to be like this in 10 years' time, or do you want to be somebody different?
That's a very good. That's a very good question, because
keep going.
Because like I did say, what's the point? I'm on antipsychotic meds. I'm doomed to gain 100 pounds. I had that what's the point mentality. Like the cards are stacked against me. But you don't know if you don't start to try. And that's trying will lead to better overall health.
Yeah. And let's face it, the other way you can look at it is, well, whatever I'm doing at the moment isn't working, because I'm getting bigger by the month. I'm not feeling any better. And if I don't do something, I'm just going to keep getting bigger. And like you said, eventually a diabetes-related illness would knock you off. It'll be heart disease. You'll get a heart attack, or there'll be something that's going to go chronic, is going to go wrong and knock you off. Like they say, most people don't die of diabetes. That's why diabetes isn't seen as a deadly illness. And yet the problem is, everybody with diabetes has got such a hugely higher potential to get heart disease and other deadly diseases. So people die of heart disease, they have a heart attack, a stroke, this sort of thing. And of course, that's written down as a heart attack or a stroke. It's not written down as, and this person had diabetes.
It should be.
So, yeah. And so that's where you and people like you who are in that position, you're just looking down the barrel of a very short life because of that, which is pretty bloody terrible and a short, uncomfortable life, as opposed to let's do something about it and get going.
Yeah, the life expectancy of mental health patients is, especially schizophrenics, is a lot less time, than the average person. And it's probably because over time, those antipsychotic drugs raise your glucose and create more problems within yourself. Because like, if you think about it, glucose is the root cause of many illnesses and diseases. So like, you're just setting yourself up for a really unhealthy life.
Yeah. And so for people who don't know, because a lot of people may find this podcast and they've got mental illness and they're not necessarily into lots of metabolic type chinwag. Glucose, of course, is a type of sugar. It's in your bloodstream. It's what is in your bloodstream. And any sugars that you eat, which include carbohydrates. I know I'm drifting here just for a minute, but include carbohydrates like potatoes and pasta and rice and bread and buns and cake and all of those things, as well as the sugar that you have in your food. And this is why processed foods are terrible. All of those get into your gut. They get converted really quickly to glucose. Glucose gets into your bloodstream and creates havoc. If you're healthy, some of it can get used in your muscles, but as soon as you got too much of it, the rest of it flows around your blood, causes horrible things, including your fatty liver, of course, and then your body will try to convert as much of it as it can to fat, which is why you get fatter. So, as you've said, Harmony, if you can cut down your glucose, you make such a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I've tried to do. Like for 3.5 years, I've worked on lowering my carbs and lowering my sugars. And I've seen a great deal of improvement in my overall health, physically and mentally. I think the before and after pictures kind of speak for themselves. Like, you could either be like this or you could try to implement metabolic therapies.
Yes, indeed. And you would say, I would have thought you'd emphatically say that mentally you feel a lot better than you used to. Is that a fair comment?
Yes. Yeah. I would say definitely. I've seen that I'm more clear thinking. Like I can piece together a conversation and be a participant and recall things a lot better. Like I'm sharper. Like I feel smarter. I feel like it mentally, like I'm just more capable. And like, okay, so like this is what I told my dietitian on my last call with her. I said, when my glucose is high, like I'll be spackling a nail pop in my wall, in my drywall, and I'll be spackling it, and I'll be like really struggling with it if my glucose is high. But if I go back to that same job the next day and my glucose is low, it's so much easier. That's how my brain processes glucose. It's so much easier when it's lower.
And I think that you've hit the nail on the head there, because I think a lot of people, I think this is the big difference, is that there are, and I said this in my previous podcast as well, which is there's a lot of comparison with your story, with Christine's story. And, I've nearly forgotten what I was saying then. Oh, that's right. Because I think some people react to glucose different from others. So some people can have elevated glucose and it doesn't matter to them. They're the people who never get fat. Some of them are the healthy people who go on about, like I said before, fat people should just exercise more and eat less. Those people who have never had a metabolic problem in their lives. And then they've got you got people who can eat the same amount of sugar, and it has such a startling difference, whether it's because they put weight on or whether it's because they become, they get a mental illness. And this is where it's been shown scientifically that mental illness and physical illness are so universally related, and why you've got therapists on one side and medical doctors on the other side, and they always are in different fields. They've got big walls between each other, but really those walls at some stage need to be knocked down. So what I'm getting at is that it could be that if you have mental illness, or if you struggle with weight, it could be something as simple as you are less able to cope with high sugar than maybe even your brother or your sister.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that there are people out there that tolerate sugar and carbs way better than other people. And it's just, you got to do what's right for you. You got to do what's right for you.
Yeah, exactly. This is going back to when you were just thinking about exercising, when you had your knee operations and stuff. How were you, because this comes back to that same story that fat people should exercise more and eat less, but a lot of obese people really struggle with energy levels, and it's been shown, and it's one of those real paradoxes that here's a person, like you said, I can work out. Let's do a quick calculation. What did I say you were in kilograms? 124 kilograms. And we'll say that your body weight, if you had no fat on you, or if you were a average person, what weight are you now, Harmony? Without, getting too personal.
I'm probably like 153, 4, something like that.
Okay.
I took on a little bit of swelling after surgery to remove extra skin on my thighs.
Okay. So you're between 65 and 70 kilograms. So if we were 124 kilograms and your let's say 70 kilos. Now, that's 54 kilograms. Sorry about the metrics. I'll show you why in a minute. 54 kilograms of fat that you had sitting on you. Now, fat is a form of energy. So 54 kilograms is 54,000 grams. And every gram of fat can provide 9 calories of energy. So we multiply that by 9. You had 486,000 calories sitting on you. That's what you walked around with. You were a walking battery pack of energy. And if you think that on your average day, a woman would burn less, but let's say for argument's sake that you burn 2,000 calories a day, which is kind of the average for a bloke, but we'll give it that. So we divide that by 2,000. You had 243 days worth of energy on you.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. The moral of the story is, fat is an amazing form of storing energy. So you could have literally starved for 243 days. You wouldn't have felt great. You still want to drink water, but you could have done that. That's why people who go on a 24-hour fast, that's I don't know if I'm going to survive. I'm doing 24 hours. You could have done 240 days.
I did daily fast at one point. Daily fast.
That's a good point, actually. I scribbled down a note before when you mentioned intermittent fasting. It's a word that I always struggle with. What is here we go. This is a hard word. How do you intermittently fast? What's your scheme on that?
I think fasting is a great metabolic therapy. I think it actually can take someone from having symptoms and lower the glucose to the point where those symptoms dissipate. I think it's a great tool that every mental health patient needs to be aware of, that if it's safe for them to do, with their doctor's approval, that they should utilize it. They should utilize it. It's a great mental health tool, and it's been very life-changing for my mental health. I speak from experience. I personally have done the 16-8 fast over the course of 3.5 years. But recently, I've even introduced longer fasts of like 20 hours and stuff like that. And when I did the 20-hour fast, my glucose plummeted the most I've ever seen. And that goes back to how back, I think in the 50s or 70s or something like that. But Russia used to treat mental health patients with a 30-day water fast. And they saw great marketable improvements. And so like, I have to wonder, like, why did we choose pills?
Yeah. Because there's money in pills. There's no money in fasting. There's money in pills. That's why. That's my cynical side of that. But I feel fairly confident that there's lots of people would agree with me. So your 16-8, of course, means that you fast for 16 hours. You don't eat for 16 hours, and then you eat for 8 hours. And then 20/4 means you don't eat for 20 hours, and then for 4 hours you can eat as much as you like. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I've done that. And the longer the fast, sometimes the more my glucose levels will drop. And so like the benefits are pretty clear, that if you can do a fast, you should do it. Yeah.
So, of course, in that instance, your body runs out of food at some stage and thinks, well, I might as well go off and chew some of that body fat, and it builds up its ketones and everything else. It's a great one. And, of course, it empties your stomach and gives your stomach a break, and your body can repair itself. There's so many benefits to fasting. And that's why a lot of people like what they call OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. I always do 2 meals a day, but that's just me. So the hour fast, then you had your 4 hours. Did you just graze during the 4 hours, or did you eat 2 meals? How did you do that?
I ate
Or how
like
do you do that?
I pretty much ate like one big meal, you
Hmm.
know, and then called it a day. But when I did that, I saw great improvements. Great, like I'd typically done the 16 8-hour fast, and that was my go-to fast. But the longer I assumed to fast, the more my glucose would nosedive, and the lower my glucose nosedived, the better I felt mentally.
Do you have a glucose monitor?
This one.
Oh yeah, there you go, a CGM. Yep, I see people with the gym at the gym these days. A lot of people wander around with them.
Yeah, and I have a Keto Mojo too, and
Okay.
those are great tools. And sometimes if you have swelling after surgery and stuff like that in your body, because the CGM, the continuous glucose monitor, it works off the subcutaneous. That's how it takes its readings, and so swelling can influence that and cause those levels to be inaccurate. Is what I'm finding after my surgery. So it's always best to follow up with like a blood test, because those are always going to be more accurate.
Yeah, I've heard that you can have, well, often people do have naturally a glucose spike when they first sort of wake up in the first few hours of the day. Do you find that, because you're not eating at that stage, do you find that your glucose still goes up anyhow?
Yeah. When I initially started wearing the monitor and started trying to implement a ketogenic diet for mental health, I did notice that my glucose spikes in the morning were pretty severe, like very severe. Like I would I would get them and I would feel uncomfortable. Like I would feel tightness in my jaw, just stress. It physically, when my glucose elevates over 100, I can feel like tightness in my jaw and the physical manifestations of a higher glucose level.
Okay.
And then when my glucose, interestingly enough, when it's lower or more in therapeutic range, I start to yawn. I start to feel tired and stuff like that. Maybe that's my body's way of saying, oh, this feels great, a nice break, relax. I don't have to operate on an inefficient fuel. I can take a breather. And I think it's kind of interesting that I yawn when my glucose does that.
Yeah. So, so with regard to your glucose in the morning bouncing up, that's not from eating food or anything. You fasted all night. Obviously, you're asleep all night. You haven't had breakfast, but your glucose still goes up. And so the only reason I say that is because if people have a continuous glucose monitor, of course, some people can get quite upset. Oh, I'm doing everything right, but my glucose is still out of control, or it's still spiking. And it's, well, that's unfortunately for everyone, that's just a natural phenomenon that our bodies do. Our body produces its own glucose at that time of the day.
Oh, it does? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that, because I was having bouts when I didn't fast with and then the next morning I would wake up and I'd have that elevation of the glucose. Because your body produces more, obviously, because that is a real thing. Because I did experience where I noted that I was having spikes in my glucose every single morning. And I even spoke to my dietitian about that. And she said, try taking in more fats throughout the day to help curb that. And she said, try taking 2 fat bombs before night to try to curb that, and stuff like that. And so it's interesting that you're aware of those spikes too.
Yeah. Did your fat bombs and things work, or did you?
Yeah. Increasing my fats and stuff like that. I don't get nearly as many symptoms of like tension in my face when it's morning and stuff like that. I don't get nearly as many of those. So I would say that it did work.
Because that's the people who say, oh, the ketogenic diet isn't very good because we need glucose, what they don't understand is our people are dumb because they think that the human body is this 1965 Ford Anglia car that's chugging down the road at 30 mile an hour, and that's all it can do. The human body is amazing with what it can achieve. If it needs glucose, it makes its own. It's called gluconeogenesis. It makes its own. It makes all sorts of hormones. It makes whatever it wants. As you know, if it doesn't have adequate supply of sugar, it goes and says, okay, well, I'll burn some of these fats and I'll make ketones. And so my body will then use ketones instead of sugar, instead of glucose for its daily energy. And it's just, the human body is amazing with what it can create, what it can do. And that's where people keep trying to manipulate the body and doing things. And I think that's where the ketogenic diet, I know I'm kind of raving here, but I think that's where people call the ketogenic diet a fad diet. And it really pisses me off, to be frank. I say, well, it's been a fad diet for 600,000 years because it's how we evolved was with a ketogenic diet. It's how we evolved since we decided to stand on two legs and walk and hunt prey down. We were ketogenic. We didn't have loads of carbohydrates even 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago. And so the body is adept at using ketones as its form of energy. And then when, of course, we add sugars, because that's what we've done for the last 50 years, look what's happened. Our whole human population has become metabolically really ill, and that majority of that is because of the introduction of sugars.
And the prevalence of an increase in mental illness. That's undeniable.
Yep. Huge increase in mental illness. And there are so many people out there who are feeling, especially who are coping with depression and anxiety, massive compared with normal. And other people go, oh, well, that's just because more people are understanding it now. So we used to always have those numbers, but, you know, it's just that more people are talking about it. It's more people are getting the illness, and that is again because of the food we're eating.
Yeah, it's in everything. You got to flip it over and read the label, and if it says it's olive oil and vinegar, it probably is seed oil. You know, it's just anything processed, I've learned, is something I need to stay away from, because that if it's easy and quick, I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to pay for it in the long run. So
on that basis, Harmony, what does your average meal look like these days? If you're doing a 20/4, 20 hours of not eating, bearing in mind, any listeners, that includes all night. So it's not quite as drastic as it at first sounds for somebody who's not used to the idea. But what time would you eat then? Would you start eating at 1 or 2 in the afternoon?
It really depends on when I started the fast, because if I started it, it depends what time I started it and what time the 20 hours would end up. But I've done it where I've only eaten dinner that day, after a 20-hour fast and stuff like that. So like I have pretty good willpower, I can push through a lot of stuff, like hunger,
so when you
pains,
do go when you do go and sit down to eat that meal, what does the meal look like?
It can be like a salad, or it can be salmon and avocado and stuff like that, and it could be olive oil. I try to use olive oil. I like coconut oil, and stuff like that. sometimes butter and cheese and stuff like that.
Okay.
But it's usually like meats. My plate would consist of 50% fat, 25% protein, and 25% carbs. And I found that a lot of times if my glucose starts rising after I just eat something, I need to incorporate more fats in my plate because my
Yeah.
glucose will spike on an unbalanced plate, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, incidentally, when you're talking about 50% or half of your plate is fat and then a quarter of it is protein, is that based on weight as opposed to based on calories?
It's based on my dietitian's recommendations for me.
Okay. All right. So generally what I'm saying there is normally if you have maybe it is by calories, because the trouble is fat is 9 calories for a gram of fat, whereas protein is 4 and carbs are 4. So you can eat the same weight of fat, but it's a little bit more than twice the calories. That's why in processed food, when people go and throw sugar and fat together and it tastes bloody good, like in the form of a donut. Yeah, donuts are my kryptonite. I haven't had one for a long time, and there's a good reason for that. Then that's why people, really pack it on in that instance, because fats are really high in calories. So if you're going to have, say, 70% of your calories come from fats, then and 20% from protein, for example, then that would work out by weight about the same amount of fat as protein by weight. Is all I'm saying. Yeah. It's a bit confusing. And that's why I ask people whether they're talking about by weight or by calories. And it sounds as if what you're talking about is by weight. It's how much is on the plate.
What the sheet that they gave me is based on an 1,800 calorie a day thing, diet with those ratios for my percentages for my
and
plate.
What sort of carbs would you eat? You said you had 20%, 25% carbs on your plate. What sort of carbs would you eat?
I like broccoli. I'm a big fan of broccoli in moderation because that's a little bit higher, but I like broccoli. I like spinach. I like celery. I like mushrooms, occasional tomatoes and stuff like that. It's tricky because like there's carbs in healthy foods like that you've been told are healthy, like the vegetables and stuff like that. So like you got to really take those in moderation is what I've learned.
Yeah, that's right. Importantly, though, you didn't mention things like potatoes and carrots and things, because as soon as it's a root vegetable, of course, there's lots of carbs in them, and those carbs become sugar. Yeah.
And sometimes when you cook vegetables, you increase the sugar content in those vegetables too, is something I've learned.
Yeah, I guess so. And so your leafy greens, which you mentioned.
Well,
I like
the carb content. Sorry.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I like asparagus too. Give that a bit of a fry up with some butter.
Oh yeah, I do asparagus.
Yeah, and a little bit of crushed garlic with me mushrooms, again fried in butter. That makes the whole house smell great.
Oh yeah, I love those. I just cooked mushrooms this week.
And that's where people go, oh, keto diet, it sounds horrible. Well, it's like, well, actually, all of our foods are fresh. You get to eat nice fatty meats, like I had lamb chops last night, and I don't cut the fat off. I eat the fat. The fat is good. And I had asparagus and mushrooms with fresh crushed garlic, in a pan with butter, and it was delicious. It really was. Yeah. Mouth-wateringly delicious. And then I poured some olive oil over the salad because I had some leafy greens, and proper olives, I have to remember that the olives have got stones in them because they really hurt your teeth if you forget. And with the olive oil, I also have a can of chopped up jalapenos. And with the olives and the jalapenos, I pour the water out when I buy the jar, and I fill the jar up with olive oil. So then I've got a can or a jar of jalapenos full of olive oil. And that olive oil will take you, it'll blow your brains out because, of course, it's really hot. And I add some of that.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I love spicy things.
Yeah. And then I add like maybe a tablespoon of that olive oil to my olives, and that warms them up as well, into the jar of olives, which are also full of olive oil. And so that gives the olives a bit of a heat as well. And then I'll add maybe sometimes a few blueberries to that salad, and maybe a few walnuts. I keep those down, but I do like blueberries and walnuts, and they're supposedly good for me.
Yeah.
So nobody
I like walnuts too.
Yeah. And so nobody can complain that that's not a pretty darn tasty meal. And I eat until I'm full, which, again, most people won't understand because if they're trying to lose weight, they're told that they have to restrict their calories. And I just eat until I'm full, but then I don't eat anything after I'm full.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're still on meds. So your mental illness is much better than it was. That's fair to say.
I would say yes, it has improved, especially because I didn't really truly start doing the diet until just this year, after my relapse, because it's hard to know what you're doing unless you have a dietitian really helping you and guiding you and telling you what you need to do and how to improve it and what's your plate ratio look like and stuff like that. And so it has improved. It has improved considerably on this diet.
Incidentally, for your own record and for anyone who's listening, there's another podcast I did a while ago. I don't know what number it is. It's with a lady called Donica, and she runs a meetup group, and it's got about 600 members, and it's called Keto for Mental Health, and that's using the ketogenic therapy. So if you're interested, I'll actually put the show, if I remember, I'll put her into the show notes. You can listen to that podcast, just if you're interested, because like having a group like that, that are all going through the same thing, can be, you'd like to think that could be quite constructive and helpful.
Yeah, obviously you can learn from others' experience with this, you know, you really can. And that's a lesson I try to teach my son. I'm like, you need to learn from others, because then you don't have to work as hard to gain that knowledge, you know?
Yeah, well, that's right. Other people have invented that wheel. So you are married. How does your husband see the new you?
Well, he loves it. He does, because when I initially was able to taper my medicines in 22, he looked at me and he's like, I feel like I got my wife back, you know? And I think that's just telling of how long-term antipsychotic use will not compare to metabolic therapies. It just, it's not in the same ballpark. It's just not.
And the difference there is how you feel about yourself versus him, who's on the outside looking in, and he obviously saw the huge transformation that went about with you. So that says it all, really.
Yeah, and more people need to be aware that there's options. That it's not just you take this medicine for the rest of your life, even though it induces horrible long-term side effects. And even though you become treatment resistant, like me, you know, on the meds, you just take more that's not going to do anything for you. That's not the answer in my situation. The answer is not taking more medicine that isn't going to relieve the symptoms of my mental illness. The answer I found to be the ketogenic diet.
That's great. What do you have to say to other people who are in the position that you used to be in?
There is hope. Even for the people that feel like there isn't any hope, even for the people that looked like me in my before picture, you can change for the better. You can make great strides to improving your quality of life.
Take my hat off to you. You were in a position when you, at that surgery time, when most people would have just given up, would have just said, screw this is me, and I'll just wait until it's time to die. But you didn't. You literally used that as a transformation moment. So I take my hat off to you. I think it's great.
Thank you. The one thing I would say, you said something about sometimes it's hard for people that are obese to get the energy to work out or to try or to put forth effort. And I would say a lot of times, for me, I've experienced low energy levels when I'm vitamin deficient in either vitamin D or iron, ferritin. When those run low for me, I notice like I can work out just as hard, but the difficulty of my workouts is substantially greater and overwhelming. But I just have such a desire to push through any boundary that I am up against. But a lot of people that would experience those same nutritional deficiencies would probably not try because it is hard. It is hard. Yeah. So if you are nutritionally deficient in certain vitamins, it can really hinder the effort that you're going to put forth. And I know that from firsthand experience.
Did you find that you were deficient in those because of, was it blood tests that came back to tell you that, or it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Did your doctor, while we're on the subject, did your doctor or anybody talk about cholesterol? Because no doubt when you were big, they mentioned cholesterol. They didn't try to put you on statins or anything else?
Well, I did have like labs done at one point in my 16 years on these antipsychotics. And of course, my bad cholesterol was up and my good cholesterol was down and such, because, you know, it just creates a very unhealthy lifestyle, those medications and stuff. And, but I believe that when I ate less carbs and less sugars, those levels did come down and stuff like that. I haven't been doing the ketogenic diet long enough to see how it's going to impact those levels going forward. But I'm hopeful that, you know, it's better than previous levels.
That's right. I think it will be. I think you'll find your fatty liver won't be fatty anymore. And because the thing with triglycerides, the thing with cholesterol, I'm fascinated with cholesterol because it gets such a hard rap by people, by everybody. And it turns out cholesterol is such a critical product. Again, what I mentioned before about the human body being so amazing. Cholesterol is an amazing product that shuttles hormones and all sorts of things around the body. And then the doctor goes and drops you on statins and it gets rid of all of your so-called bad cholesterol, which are the ones that are shuttling all the stuff around. And then suddenly people have no sex drive whatsoever. They can't remember their own name half the time. They're always tired. And it's because the cholesterol has been taken out of their bloodstream. And the cholesterol used to shuttle hormones around, including testosterone and estrogen.
Does it also shuttle the thyroid hormone around?
I can't confirm or otherwise that. I'm not sure. It could very well do. It's basically the Amazon courier of your body, and with your brain, 25% of your brain is cholesterol. So when these doctors go and drop statin drugs into people's bodies, that's why they get brain fog and they're always tired, because their brains have literally 25% cholesterol are being butchered by these statins. And so what happens is the problem with the cholesterol that people is, again, it's a bit like saturated fats they used to say saturated fats cause heart disease, and we found out later on that was crap. It's because the heart disease looks like a saturated fat. When you've got fat building up in your arteries, it looks like saturated fat. So, it is saturated fat. So it must be from the saturated fat you've eaten. Well, that's so wrong. Again, your body is creating that saturated fat. Where's it creating it from? Sugars. So your sugars are going to your liver. They're getting converted to triglycerides. And they're also, the sugars are attacking your LDL and oxidizing them and making them into little tiny LDL particles that then cause problems with your arteries. And so when you get rid of your sugars like you've done, you get rid of your triglycerides and you get rid of the oxidized little LDLs, the bad cholesterols. You get rid of the proper bad cholesterols, and you should find that all of that has taken a turn for the better.
Yeah.
It's an amazing subject, and I'm no expert at it, but it's just amazing. And the whole thing is, your body is designed to do its thing. Just leave it alone. But you've got to give it good food first.
Yeah.
Give it good food, give it good fuel, and then sit back and let it repair itself, which is what you've done.
Tried. I'm trying. I'm trying really hard.
It's not an end game, though, is it? It's not something I'm going to do it for 3 years and then I'm going to stop. It's like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, because this is how my body should be fed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you realize the consequences of not giving your body what it needs, you will go to extraordinary measures to give it what it needs, because that's how you will thrive. I've obviously come a long ways, because 2 years ago, I don't think I could hold down a conversation in a podcast. I probably couldn't recall the specifics enough of my story to tell it, but yeah, I've seen drastic improvements, and I can now recall things and contribute to progress towards mental health care.
Yes. Well spoken. Thank you, Harmony. That was a really good podcast. I feel that Harmony spoke from her heart and explained how she felt, and it took a lot of courage, because she's not the sort of person who's used to talking about the situation. So she's come a long way, and let's face it, it's a journey. Life is a journey. It's not over. It will continue to be a journey for her, as with all of us. By the way, with these podcasts that I do, these are all non-profit. I don't make any money out of them. There's no advertising. And to be honest, podcasts are actually quite expensive to produce, because there are a lot of subscriptions we need to have in order to create a podcast channel. If you would like to donate a couple of dollars or a few pound each month, then you can do so. If you look in the show notes of your podcast provider for this episode and other episodes, you'll see a little line there that says support the show. If you click on that, it gives you the option to provide £3 or £5, kind of like a cup of coffee if you like, a donation towards the podcast, so I can keep going and hopefully provide more interesting people to chat to. Oh, and by the way, also if you have questions, ideas, all that sort of stuff, then please post them on, again, I think on the show notes somewhere there'll be a place there that you can post your queries. If you want to contact Harmony, I will put that in the show notes as well, as far as her ex address is concerned. All right, thank you very much.